Welcome to our Pick the Brain podcast. I'm Dr. Caleb Frankel. I'm an ER vet by trade and founder of Instinct. We started this new project because over the years of building Instinct, we've been really fortunate to get to learn from some of the best hospital leaders in the veterinary field. And we wanted to turn that into something new. So that's what this podcast is. And our goal is to share some of the learning that is out there on all things hospital operations, leadership, ownership, industry trends, and of course, technology, which is why we're here today for this episode. So today we're doing our last episode of what we're calling season 1, and we're going to do something special for it with a bit of a longer format. And to that end, I have a very special guest today, Rohan Relan. You all, or some of you may know Rohan as Potatoes, the now celebrity ScribbleVet mascot's dad. But he's also known as the founder and CEO of ScribbleVet. Rohan has an awesome background, which we're going to get into, and that sort of includes being part of Instinct because of our exciting Instinct news earlier this year, where we brought Instinct and ScribbleVet together into one company now. So I'm lucky to call Rohan a colleague. We're having Rohan on today, though, because I want to pick your brain on all things AI. And specifically how veterinary leaders should maybe think about AI in the future ahead. Now, I'll start by saying there is a lot of noise out there about AI. And it's out there both outside of our industry as well as from within. But I think that's for good reason. It's become clear to me, and I think many others, that because of AI, we're in a unique time of technological shifting that I think is going to fundamentally bleed into major changes for society in a similar way, and maybe even potentially at a higher magnitude way as previous shifts that we've seen. Think things like the mobile technology revolution that many of us went through, or the launch of the internet itself before that. And even if you look back further, you can think about societal shifts like the Industrial Revolution and compare to some of that history. So when you go through stuff like this, I think that means that there's going to be a lot of speculating because, quite honestly, it's hard to know where all of this is heading, especially for us, our hospitals, our caretakers, and the patients that we care for. So now, to be clear, I don't think Rohan or I or anybody has any of these answers, but I thought it would be really fun for our last episode of season 1 for Pick the Brain for me to pick an actual expert brain on AI. So Rohan has literally been working on AI for over 10 years. And maybe we can leverage a little bit of that expertise here today, Rohan, to help hospital leaders think about how they should think about AI in the future. So welcome to Pick the Brain, and thanks for joining us.
Cool. Thanks. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. So, okay, before we jump into just all things in trends in AI, I actually want to ask about your journey in your career with AI. I think it'd be cool for everybody to hear a little bit about how you got your start. I think a lot of folks don't know this, but you actually started a company that was acquired by Google in the past, and you ended up at Google, subsequently sort of working for them roughly 10 years ago, I think. And that was around the time when, you can actually point back to a lot of the AI revolution that we're seeing today started at a core group of people at Google, and you happened to, be around it at that time. So can you maybe walk us through your career journey and maybe a little bit about that time?
Yeah, I think maybe something that folks don't know is that Google was actually where a lot of modern AI started. In fact, part of the reason that OpenAI exists, and this is part of their history, part of the lore, is that Elon Musk was so worried about the fact that Google basically had every single AI researcher working for them under either DeepMind or Google Brain. They actually had two AI groups, independent AI groups that collectively had essentially all of the AI talent in the world working under them. And this all kind of came to a head around 2014, 2015. Google is where the transformer architecture, which if you think about ChatGPT, the T in ChatGPT stands for transformer. So that's where the transformer was invented. Um, and 2014, 2015 is right when deep learning, which is what underpins all of modern, what we think of as modern AI today, are large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, Sonnet, etc. Um, all of that is underpinned by this transformer architecture, which was invented at Google. Um, I happened to get lucky. I joined in 2014 after they acquired my last company. And right then and there was when AI was kind of exploding throughout the company. They called it machine learning at the time. We didn't really use the term AI that much. I was a sort of combination product manager and engineer while I was at Google. Not a standard role that they have, but just by virtue of the fact that we were acquired in, we ended up having sort of unique titles. And one of the things as a product manager that you have to do is you have to write product requirement documents. And every product requirement document at Google had this question you had to answer, which was, are you using machine learning in your product? And if not, please explain. And so you were sort of like expected to use it because they thought it was so compelling that it was going to really revolutionize everything. They were right. And that's what got me thinking, like, this is really interesting. I talked to some of the other teams within the company who were doing, honestly, at the time, things that were really far ahead. I mean, they weren't going to work because they were so far ahead of their time. They would probably work today, but this was, 12 years ago now. Um, but it was just really exciting to see how they were thinking about it, what they thought the potential were, and the company of Google size investing as much as they were into it. So as soon as I left Google, I left in, I believe, like 2015, 2016, late 2015. Um, Once I left, that was what I was focused on. I have no academic background in AI. So I decided to sort of become self-taught. One of the great things about this space is you can just kind of dive in and start doing stuff. And so took online classes, did Kaggle competitions. Kaggle is like this big open machine learning competition where anyone can join and compete on a leaderboard. And so did a couple of those to learn how to work with these tools, became an AI consultant, started another AI company that actually didn't end up going anywhere, um, but taught me a lot. And that's how I ended up sort of getting deep into the space.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was reading something about, just the history of that group at Google. I think I didn't know this and many people don't know this, but you can trace almost all of the AI companies right now back to that group. And I didn't realize this, but Google's AI team obviously started there. Meta's chief AI scientist, Tesla's AI CTO, the person who basically developed full self-driving, came from there. Anthropic's founders, Claude, OpenAI's
Hmm.
co-founder, and even Microsoft. I was reading the CTO who leads AI strategy came out of that group, so, or one of those groups. So it's kind of wild actually to think about how it all started there, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's probably not an exaggeration uh, that they had 90% of the AI talent, basically all working within Google. And they were really
Wow.
betting on it much, much earlier than anybody else. One place you can see this is Waymo, their self-driving system. I mean, if
Yeah.
you look back at how long they've been doing Waymo, I forget exactly when it started, but it was before 2014. And so they've been working on this forever. And really has only started working,
Yeah.
and working really well, I should say, but it's really only started working recently, right? In the
Yeah.
last few years is when you can see these cars driving themselves around San Francisco and order one, and it's awesome. I mean, it's if you haven't been in one, it's amazing for the first 5 minutes, and then gets very boring, which is exactly what you would want from a self-driving car.
It's incredible. I took my first one in Phoenix last year, and it was wild.
Yeah.
Um, okay, well, that's a pretty cool background, and I think that sets the stage nicely. But before we keep going, tell us how ScribbleVet started and maybe the why behind it.
Yeah, ScribbleVet started because of my dog Potato. So I got her over 6 years ago now, and she was a Mexican street dog, and then she ended up at the rescue, and she was at the rescue for a year and a half. Uh, I got her the day that San Francisco went into quarantine. I was not sure I was looking for a dog, but I was going to the rescues to see if I was going to be interested. And then they were just trying to get rid of all the dogs at that moment because they were like, we're going to quarantine, we're shutting down, we need everyone out. We don't know if we're going to be able to come back here tomorrow. So I took her as a foster, kept her for a month. And then, of course, the dog started flying off the shelves. And so during COVID, and so they asked for her back. And I took her back. I actually left her there for 3 days and then said, nope, I want her. and went and grabbed her and then adopted her. And little did I know that I was turning my life upside down. She has just had she's taken over my life in many ways, but one of them is that she's had a whole host of medical issues. I think I can't keep count anymore, but probably over 60 vet visits in the last 6 years. We just did an additional two recently. She's probably been to five different specialties. She has had a lung tumor. She has had a TPLO. She's had recurrent UTIs. She's had skin issues, just a whole host of things. And so if we go circle back 3 years, I'd probably been to the vet over 40 times in the 3 years preceding my starting ScribbleVet. And at the same time, I was working in AI. I had friends who were working in the human medical space in AI, actually doing very similar things related to scribing. And they were just telling me about how much of a difference it was making in the lives of the doctors that they were serving. Meanwhile, I'm going to the vet once a month, and I was like, I wonder if some of that can be translated over. I wonder if these veterinarians that I'm going to have similar tools, they don't seem to have anything, particularly in line with what's going on in the AI space that I know of. And that was kind of the spark of the idea of like, hey, maybe we can just bring some of these tools over from human med into veterinary med.
That's amazing. Tell us about the first couple months of ScribbleVet when you were getting it off the ground and how you were getting feedback. And yeah, I always love hearing the early day stories.
Yeah, so it started with just building a prototype and then getting it in the hands of a few different people. A friend of mine who was an early tester, actually posting on Reddit in the Our Veterinary Profession forum and getting just really random folks to try it out from there. People who just happened to be reading that forum at the right time and giving it a shot. One of our messaging someone on Reddit who was using ChatGPT, of another veterinarian who was messaging about how ChatGPT was helping her. And then, that came full circle. We ended up hiring her into the company about a year later, and now she works at Instinct. So that was great. She provided a ton of feedback, and we brought her in that way. But sort of funny story. The way that we actually shipped the first version, it was terrible. I mean, we were requiring users to record their audio using voice memos on their phone. So a completely separate app. You would launch the native voice memos on your iPhone. You would record using that. And then you had to download that memo, attach it to an email it to us, and then we would email back the resulting note. And the crazy thing was that people still loved it. Our initial group of people, just through virtue of who we knew, was specialty vets, and we were not good
Yeah.
enough for their workflow and what specifically they were looking for. But as soon as we got it into the hands of a few GPs, where this was kind of really designed for their workflow, even with that really weird, janky flow, we saw people just starting to pick it up. And as an entrepreneur who had tried a few companies before and tried a few products before, I knew that when you have something that is really not well built, but it still works and people are still trying to pull it out of your hands and they're complaining about all the issues, that's a really good sign that you're solving a real problem. So that was kind of how the company started and how we ended up seeing like, hey, there's actually something here that's worth investing in. And since then, we've been running as fast as we can to keep up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty awesome to hear. It shows how innovation and new product development is very messy in the early days and you sort of hack it together. But when you see that you've tapped into a problem like you did, like it just powers everything, which is awesome.
Yeah, and there's a lot of luck in there too. Like one of the things that ended up happening was one of our users posted on the DVM Moms group, and for whatever reason she posted about ScribbleVet. This was very very early, and she was just asking if anyone else had seen anything like it, because she was getting a lot of value out of it. And she posted with this really sort of striking image of her holding two castrated testicles. Someone had painted this image of her doing that. And so you have this really striking image, this post about Scribble. It got a ton of attention. It was on DVM Moms. I mean, over 20,000 subscribers to that Facebook group. And yeah, that post happened to get a ton of attention. And so we went from, maybe one or two signups a week to over 50 signups a day, just from that one post. And so, not something we orchestrated, not something we would have even thought to do, but it happened. That's the luck factor, and that kind of set us on a much faster growth rate than we had anticipated.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, lots of luck, lots of serendipity that makes things actually work.
Yeah, well, I believe you control that. We had similar stories with Instinct Treatment Plan when we launched, but if you hadn't made a good product, she wouldn't have posted that, or however you want to think about it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, opportunity and preparation.
Yeah,
Those are the two.
yep. Well, so you were early. I mean, this was chat GPT moment, we all call it, was late 22, early 23, I guess, you can say. So let's this is probably a good time to sort of shift the conversation a little bit into sort of this AI world we're living through and looking ahead at. Um, I would, in my brain, I don't know if you'd categorize it this way, but earlier this year we had, I think, the next step function from that chat GPT moment, or at least how I'm seeing it. And I think many software companies are realizing this, but maybe it isn't clear to the rest of the world. And that step function, I think, came with what we're sort of calling coding agents right now. It happened with Claude's release of Opus 4.6, and there was probably a little bit before that as well. But really, the technology world, the software development world, the companies working on tech have seen this and seen how much that sort of has brought AI at another level in terms of usefulness and maybe informing where it's going. So can you talk a little bit about coding agents, and for veterinary hospital leaders who have never heard of this or wondering what the buzz is about AI this year, can you talk a little bit about it and how you think about it?
Yeah, I think there were actually three changes that have happened. The first is just the ChatGPT coming out at all, right? Suddenly you had this tool where before there was there's a site called Stack Overflow, where you could ask a question and then other members of the community, the programming community, would answer your question. And so it had these two effects. One, you had this huge pool of questions that were already out there that you could search. So you would sort of, I have a problem, I would search for it, hope there's someone had asked the same question before and see it come up in Stack Overflow. And then if no one had, I could ask, and then someone would answer it, hopefully.
Yeah, we have
And
something like that called Vin, right?
yeah,
Veterinarians
right,
know it very
exactly.
well. It's
So
a super
yeah,
useful tool. Yeah.
yeah, so Stack Overflow was Vin for coders essentially, and then ChatGPT came out, and instead of having to search, you could sort of you had this question answer bot that you could ask a question, and it was pretty good at sort of finding the information and giving you an answer. Not amazing, obviously, when it first came out, but getting better with every iteration, right? And so that was what changed coding the first time, and I think a lot of folks are already now pretty familiar with that. It's sort of across industries. Like you have this
Yeah.
chatbot, you can ask a question, and it gives you a really good answer. The next thing that happened is that experience kind of became integrated in our tools. And so if I was using what we call a text editor, which we use to write code, now it could sort of autocomplete what I was doing, and it got more and more intelligent at doing that autocomplete. So while before it could autocomplete one line, now it could use AI to autocomplete an entire function. And that was actually a pretty big difference. And a lot of programmers were really excited about that, right? It was like, I don't have to type in like go through the drudgery of typing in this function that I've typed in like 100 times before. I can just let it autocomplete, it'll fill it in, and I can sort of go a lot faster because I'm doing this autocomplete. But fundamentally, as a programmer, I'm still in control. And I think that was a pretty big step function change. That's when a lot of people started becoming exposed to AI. That's when people really incorporating it directly into their workflows and into their tooling. Um, and I think maybe a lot of people thought like that's what this was going to look like. And AI is very, very fast. So within about 6 months, coding agents came out. And I think this is actually one of the places where we're seeing that the impacts of all of the investment that is going into programming from these AI labs, they're really, really invested. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say like hundreds of billions of dollars of investment have gone in to making programming and coding really efficient using AI. I think this is one of the places that we see that where a lot of other industries have not seen agents come in and have not seen agents have not adopted them yet. But in coding, like agents have sort of really started taking over. And the thing that's different here is you're not sitting there sort of writing the first few lines of a function or writing the first few lines of a file. You're actually just talking to the agent and telling it what you want to do, and then the agent goes off and does it, and then shows you its work at the end, right? So the agent is actually doing most of the programming work. it's not a sort of like ask a question, get a response. It's a thing that has a goal. You have given it the goal, and it has a bunch of tools that it can use to execute that goal. And then it uses those tools to try and complete that that project that you gave it, and then says, here's what I got for you. What do you think? Um, and now that kind of is dramatically different in terms of how you program, and so has kind of mixed responses from some people. Right? If you're a programmer, you're like, this is not what my job is, right? This doesn't look like a lot like what my job used to look like. Or you can be like, this is amazing. Like now, if I considered my job just building a product, now I can get a lot more done because I can just ask the agent, tell it what I want, and then maybe tell it 5 different things that I want at the same time. It'll go do all of the things, and then I can just look at the results when they come back and make sure that's what I was expecting. So I think this is the dramatic shift that really kicked off about 8 months ago with some of the newer models that were good enough at actually to do this. Um, so that's been one which has not been broadly distributed. I think this is one where coding is pretty far ahead of most industries.
Yeah.
We don't really see a lot of powerful veterinary agents today, for example, but coding agents are sort of spreading like wildfire throughout the programming industry.
Yeah, and for veterinary leaders who aren't really paying attention as much, how has that led to tools, agents like Cowork and Claude bots and all these things? Can you help everybody understand what those are and how they're emerging?
Yeah. So if you're using something like, let's just take Claude Cowork as an example. Funnily enough, Claude Cowork is essentially just a rebranding of a coding agent called Claude Code. It's just a rebranding for non-programmers. But you can think of it. So why is Claude Cowork an agent? Let's start there. Like, what is it that makes it an agent? I mentioned that an agent is something that has a goal, and it's something that has a set of tools, and then it uses those tools to accomplish that goal. That kind of encompasses all of an agent. At the core of it, I guess, is this AI model that can do this thing, that can sort of ask for the tools and that can interpret, the goal setting that you're giving it and think about what needs to happen next and then execute on that. So why is Claude Cowork an agent? Um, Fundamentally, the goal you give it is the one that you sort of give it in the prompt. I mean, that's the part that everyone's used to. That's what we've had since ChatGPT, all of 3 years ago, which is an eternity in the AI world. That's where it gets its goal from. So far, we don't have a system that is self-directed, where we don't have AIs that sort of generate their own goals. I'd argue that's a good thing. That may not be something we want for a very long time because that's sort of going down the Skynet path. So right now, all the AI systems, they don't generate their own goals. We give them a goal. So you might give it a goal like, hey, help me organize all of the files on my desktop. It's a mess on my desktop. Like, let's reorganize it. So now it has this goal. And the tools that Claude Cowork has available to it are actually the tools that you would get as a developer working on your computer. You can open up the terminal and you have all these sort of tools that Claude Cowork is really good at using because it's fundamentally a coding agent. And so it can do things like move files around, copy files, delete files, create folders. It can do all of that.
Yep.
And so those are the tools that it has available. And so it just starts executing and kind of reasoning through, okay, I need to think about, like, let me list all the files that you have. Wow, you have a bunch of screenshots that you have never deleted off your desktop. They're all titled screenshot something. Great, let me put all of those into a folder. Let me use the create folder tool and then the move file tool to do that. And that's fundamentally all that Claude Cowork is. It's a really smart reasoning AI in the center of this harness where you have a goal-oriented system and a set of tools that is working to accomplish that goal.
Okay, love it. If you haven't played with these tools, I'd recommend it. It's very interesting, and it can be really powerful for certain tasks. But like you mentioned, I completely agree with this. I think the technology world is very much ahead of other industries. When I go into veterinary hospitals, and you go into veterinary hospitals, it's these things are not being used, maybe never even heard of. And that makes sense based on where we are. But I'm interested in your thoughts next on what you think this means for veterinary leaders and how AI is going to impact our hospitals in the years to come, based on what you're seeing with AI progress in our software industry right now.
Yeah. And I think I may have a unique and maybe somewhat biased perspective on this, because obviously all of the folks that I tend to talk to are pretty advanced in their AI usage because generally they're using ScribbleVet, right? So they're using a tool which is fundamentally, one of the more cutting edge AI tools available today. And so they are kind of on the edge of AI usage. But and ScribbleVet is a workflow tool, right? It's actually not goal directed in the sense that it has a few different workflows that it can execute. And we predefine what those workflows look like. And so one of them is being able to help you write your SOAP notes, and it uses AI to do that. And so anyone who's using ScribbleVet is fundamentally using AI, sort of the way that programmers were using AI maybe a year ago, in the sense that it's a tool that has a specific task and can accomplish that task. Um, but what we haven't seen really happen to the veterinary industry yet is bringing AI agents into the mix. That there aren't really a lot of AI agents in the veterinary world, and again, this is a place where it's just really more advanced in the programming world, and I think a lot of other spaces it's not happened, including veterinary. Um, so what might it look like if you kind of project to what does an AI agent do? Um, Imagine you have an AI agent that just knows that you like to be prepared. Like you have given it this goal of saying, "Hey, I like to be prepared, really well prepared before every appointment." Right? What could it do? It could say, and let's say, in fact, let's even make it a little more complicated. You're a mobile vet, so you're about to show up at someone's house. It could say, "Hey, I have access to your calendar because you've given me that tool to read your calendar. So I know you're about to show up to this person's house and see this patient. Um, I can see that you are that you've seen this patient before. So I have access to your practice management system, and I can read prior notes from there. So I can see that you've seen this patient before." I've prepared a summary for you that I've popped up in the app. Right before you walk in, you're going to see that I've popped up the summary for you of everything that's happened with this patient before. Um, and I see that this person called in maybe 10 minutes before while you were on the road, and they had this additional concern that they brought up that they wanted you to take a look at. So just like be aware that this is this additional thing.
Yeah.
You weren't able to answer the phone, but maybe your assistant did, and this is what they took down, and I have access to the recordings from there, so I've kind of pulled that in and made that available to you as well. That's what an agent would do. That's very different than what a set workflow would do, because in a workflow, it's hard for me as a programmer to think about all of these things that might need to happen in all of the various edge cases. But for an agent, it's just like, hey, what do I need to accomplish this goal? I will check all of these things and then try to provide that answer to you as quickly.
Yeah. And you have a very specific definition of agent. I know it's used sort of loosely. You've sort of mentioned it here, but how
Mhm.
does it compare to like hiring an assistant to do a task or a set of tasks, like a human? I mean, how do you equate those?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, an agent is similar. There's one key difference that I'll bring up, which is that a, well, okay, actually, let's rewind. Like, why is an agent different from ChatGPT? Maybe that's a good
Yeah.
kind of first starting point. And then, like, why does it get us closer to that human assistant? Um, with ChatGPT, if you go into ChatGPT and you send it a message, fundamentally, it does not have access to things like tools on your computer, right?
Yep.
This is changing. Actually, ChatGPT is becoming a little bit more of an agent. So, like, let's rewind to a year ago when you used ChatGPT. How did it work? You sent it a message, it would process that message, and then it would give you a response, and that was it. If you had to go and do a search to get more information, like that was on you, right? It was like it maybe would tell you something like you may want to go check Google for XYZ thing, or next step would be to do this, but like you're on your own. Like, go do that thing. So it's sort of a send it a request, send it a question, get a response. It was basically a question and answer bot. Agents are a little bit different in the sense that they say, you send me a request, but I have this set of tools that I can use to solve the problem. And I can kind of run for an indefinite period of time. It may take me, 20 minutes to get back to you with the answer. So if you
Yep.
ask me a particularly deep question, I might go and search, 30 websites, and then, have a bunch of other tools available. Maybe I can go and check your email if you've connected that for me,
Yep.
and use those tools to solve the problem and get that back. Um, and that, I think, brings us a lot closer to what an assistant would do, right? Like you don't expect a human assistant if you say, "Hey, Caleb, can you tell me, what my next appointment is?" You wouldn't expect your human assistant to go, "Well, like I can't read your calendar, so I will just tell you that you should check your calendar for the answer." It's not like a particularly helpful assistant, you would give your assistant access to your calendar and then say, great, like, hey, can you tell me what my next appointment is? And your assistant, you would expect to open up your calendar and tell you, they would tell you like, yeah, your next appointment's at 12:30. Um, so I think in that sense, it gets much, much closer to the human assistant world. The key difference, of course, is that at least today, like I said, these are not self-directed.
Yep.
So in some sense, you predefine the goals, but we do not currently have agents that are good at anticipating what you might want to do, and maybe looking at your calendar the day before, and without you ever having told it you want to do this, saying, oh, you know what, like Caleb has a lot of back-to-back stuff, and I'm going to put a break in at 12 o'clock today so that he has time to eat lunch. Like, if you have not told your assistant to do that, it is very rare for an agent to take that sort of self-directed effort.
Yep.
Um, and then, of course, their capabilities, the time frame at which they can operate under, the memory that they have. Like, this is another big differentiator between human assistants. A human assistant learns you over time. They train on your behaviors effectively.
Yeah.
We don't really have that with agents to a large degree. There are ways that people have tried to sort of incorporate that in, but it's really not to the same level. So the time frame an AI agent can operate on is probably on the hours, not sort of multi-day level that a human assistant.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's pretty exciting. Well, there's another side of it that I want to touch on next. So, and I know you and I think about this a lot. I know Scribble thinks about this a lot. You wrote an article, I think, in today's Veterinary Business earlier this year about sort of trust and safety with AI in the
Hmm.
veterinary hospital. We are we're an industry that operates in critical outcomes, literally life and death scenarios, right? And so I think you and I initially have bonded around sort of how veterinarians and veterinary leaders need to be thoughtful about this more than a lot of industries. So I know you have led the way in quality and trust and safety, but how do you pair that with the agents that you're talking about, and maybe just more broadly, if you're a veterinary leader, you're leading a hospital, what should you be thinking about as either adopt tools or just trying to lead your hospital, whether they're veterinary specific tools or not, because a lot of hospitals are using non-veterinary specific AI tools, obviously.
Yeah, there's a few different things there, and I will say I have a sort of personal desire to make sure that these tools are used safely and that ScribbleVet is used safely because my primary care veterinarian uses ScribbleVet, her surgeon uses ScribbleVet, so I have a very vested interest in making sure that these tools are used safely. I kind of think there's a few different angles here. The first is when you think about an AI tool in general, what is important, and how do you think about like what type of AI tools are gonna do you want to sort of take a really close look at in terms of hey, is this something that's actually safe, and what is the nature of tools where it's actually easier to be safe? Um, I think fundamentally you have to have human review. This is not necessarily through any sort of like core principle. Maybe we'll get to the point in the future where, for example, an AI is so good at taking notes that you don't need human review. Like maybe that'll happen. But practically, empirically today, we're not there, right? The AIs are just not smart enough. Often they don't have the right level of context. Maybe just um, as a really pointed example, like ScribbleVet can't see you in the room, right? So there's something that that happened that ScribbleVet doesn't know because it just has a recording, and you listening to a recording also wouldn't know that. So they are going to make mistakes. No matter how good they get, at least in their current form, they are going to make some sort of mistake, which means you do need to have human review in there checking them. So that kind of leads to this natural conclusion that the best use of AI today is something where doing the initial work of creating the artifact would have taken you a lot of time. I call it the generation process. Like generating is hard, but
Yep.
verification is relatively easy. So if you have a process where like verification is just as hard as generation, where in order to verify that the work is correct, you basically have to do it yourself, well, then you have no time savings, right? So what's the point? If you're going to have to do the work anyway, what's the point of if you have to read the whole source article in order to make sure that this is accurate? Like, why bother? Um, on the flip side, if you have something where uh, verifying is really hard, then you have no way. Sorry, on the flip side, if you have a problem where generating is really easy, then again, you're at this point where where's the value, right? If it's going to take me 2 minutes to do this myself, or 2 seconds to do this myself, like why do I need an AI to do it? Um, so the sweet spot is really, hey, it would have taken me a lot of time to write these notes, but as I'm walking out the room, it takes me just 30 seconds to check them and make sure that they're accurate because I literally just had the conversation, so I can make sure that everything in here is correct. So that's this, I call it like hard to generate, easy to verify space, which I think is really the sweet spot for AI tools. Um, and as a tool builder, you can do certain things to make that to be more true or less true. And so, but ultimately, as a user of the tool, you can look at the tool and say, okay, how long would it take me to generate this output? And then how long is going to take me to check it? And if the latter is much shorter than the former, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, I
Um,
love it.
I think the second thing that people need to be worried about is just what is happening with their data. Are the tools they're using? I mean, specifically in this industry, if you're using ChatGPT at home, to answer questions about, where to go for dinner, like this is not on the radar, right? This is
Yeah,
less important. But when you're using it in the clinic, um, yeah, clinics probably have, or if they don't have, they probably should set up AI policies around, hey, what kind of tools can you use? Where can that information go? You're talking about the health data of a patient. You may not want that becoming part of the training data for ChatGPT. You will not want that going out of the purview of an approved tool for the clinic. So I
yeah.
think the privacy stance of the tools you're using is really important as well. And what did they do with the data? And yeah, just how are they keeping it sort of safe and secure, and using it in ways that you understand and are okay with.
Yeah. I know you and I also talk about content. Obviously, Instinct is the maker and builder of plums and standards and clinicians brief. And, there are medical professionals in human health and veterinary, using general purpose LLMs for lookup. I know you and I, talk a lot about this, but, when it comes to general purpose LLMs, maybe talk about how they sort of work and how they would handle a situation when they have conflicting information. Maybe they have access to an old textbook with a drug dose and a forum with a drug dose and a clinic's outdated online handout with a drug dose, and what you're risking when you sort of go out there and use these tools that are not built for that to potentially get help. They look good. We've seen this in human health, but under the hood, what's the acceptable error rate, I guess?
Yeah, and I think the short answer is sort of no one knows, which should give you a little bit of a flavor of what that actually means, right? If you ask me the question, for example, if ChatGPT looks up 5 sources, um, how does it determine, which source it's going to reference in the output? The answer is basically nobody knows. It's kind of internal to the system that is a black box to us, as well as Anthropic and OpenAI. It's not something that anybody knows within the world today. I mean, we're trying to get better at figuring it out, and that should scare people, right? But let's sort of start with, let's say you ask a question, what is the appropriate dose of some medication for this patient? And you ask it into ChatGPT today. ChatGPT does have a couple tools available to it today that it didn't have a couple of years ago. So this is something that's changed. So one of the main tools that it has is web search. So it might do a web search and search for dosage of dosage of gabapentin for dogs or something. It might do that search, and whatever articles come back is it's going to get pulled into its context, and so it's going to read those articles effectively, and then yeah, through some magical little black box process, which is the magic of AI, it'll synthesize all of that together to give you an answer. Um, and this goes back to this like easy to verify point, which is you have this answer that's coming from a web search, and it could have looked up any article. It could have looked up a Reddit post, right, where
Yep.
somebody happened to post like, not even a veterinarian, but me as a random person could post something on there saying, hey, I found that giving my dog, twice the recommended dose of gabapentin seems to work really well. And then it comes back and says, that's interesting. Like, let's go ahead and surface that information. And if you have to go through and then click all of the sources that it's citing and read them and make sure that it's a valid source, well, it would probably have been faster for you to just go and open up Plums and get that source yourself, right? From a trusted source. And so that's actually pretty hard to verify because it's a kind of black box system, and pulling in information of sort of unknown provenance. Um, this kind of goes to this core problem of how LLMs work, which is one, we can't really introspect them yet. We can't really look inside and see exactly what's happening and how it's weighting these. And so, because we can't do that, it's also hard to necessarily manipulate that information or manipulate that process and say, actually, I want you to weight this higher. You can do it somewhat with prompting, but you can't do it perfectly. And then
Yeah.
the second thing that's important for people to know is the ChatGPT can't do it itself, right? ChatGPT has as much knowledge of the inner workings of its system as we have of the inner knowledge of our brains, right? Or of the inner workings of our brain. So just like you can't answer the question like, why did that thought come to me just now? If you ask ChatGPT like, how confident are you in that response, or where did you get that information from? It may or may not give you the right answer. So it's not something you want to necessarily trust on that.
Yeah.
So this is where I think trusted content is really important. And you can do things like control what the context the ChatGPT has, or at least the system that you're using can control the context that it has in order to make sure that you're getting trusted outputs. And then the system can make it easier for you to do the verification as well, right? Hey, this
Yep.
is cited from this source, and this is not me telling you that this is cited from this source. I have literally matched the output text in my answer to the message in this journal or to the content in this journal, and they are exactly the same. And I'm giving you the thumbs up like that this is accurate. So you can do things at a system level to solve it,
Yeah.
but it's not going to happen by default.
Yeah. I think we're in this Wild West period where a lot of people see the magic of something like Claude and ChatGPT. I certainly do. I use it every day. But when you need high accuracy and, what's an acceptable error rate? Like 1 in 1,000, that could kill a patient, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 1,000,000. I would argue it's none of those, right?
Hmm.
And so, you have to be really careful. And I think most veterinarians understand that, but it's worth sort of mentioning. Maybe last question around AI here. Practically, many veterinary hospital leaders may not know where to start when it comes to like guidance and leadership of their hospital around AI. What advice, if you were consulting with a large veterinary practice and the leaders are trying to maybe give some guidance to their veterinarians, their staff on both adopting AI and the safe and responsible use of it. What would you have them do to start, or what advice would you give them?
It's a good question. I think probably, well, obviously I happen to be biased here,
You're
right?
biased. Yeah, we all are. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's
The
okay.
I think sort of I think of this from an entrepreneur's perspective, right? Which is what is and veterinarians are and practice owners are entrepreneurs, and so I think I've just seen in talking to a lot of vets are really entrepreneurial, and I think this is something that the industry, it's unique to this industry. My previous companies were not in the vet space. It's really unique to this industry how entrepreneurial all the veterinarians are and the people who work in this space. And I think that can be a huge advantage, because what you have is this population who is really excited about new ways to solve their problems and new and ways to improve the industry. And so you can kind of harness that um, to come up with solutions that are really interesting and move a lot faster than a lot of other industries would move. Um, and so the thing that I would think about is what is something that we're doing today that is taking a lot of time, right? Like, what is one of the big problems that we have that we can solve? Um, and is there a tool that maybe exists that kind of solves that? And then just going back to, and then like once it solves this, just knowing that it's going to be imperfect, does it have this loop where I can really quickly check that the answer is correct? And if not, fix it. And any tool that kind of fits those criteria is probably going to be a good one, because changing workflows is hard. So you want something that solves a big problem. Um, you can't necessarily trust AI tools, so you want something that fundamentally keeps humans in the loop. And you want something where the tool pre-exists, so you're not trying to like build things whole cloth, because it's not a small amount of work, right? Scribble was not a tiny company when we got acquired. We had 30 people because it is a decent amount of work to build these tools.
Yep.
So I think that's one thing that you can do that's just immediately you will sort of see the benefits, and then that will kind of create this flywheel of saying, okay, what comes next? So starting small, starting with a real problem, trying to solve it, and then kind of going from there and letting the entrepreneurial nature of veterinarians kind of drive, hey, what do we, what should we do next? I think that's what we've seen a lot of be successful in driving our growth and creating a lot of benefit for the clinics as well. Um, I think one other thing that is, I mentioned these coding agents. I think one other thing that we didn't talk about that is really interesting and exciting is that coding agents give everybody, to some degree, the ability to write code. And that's kind of a superpower. If you haven't had it before, now you can do things in your digital world that you couldn't do before. And I think this is a space that's going to get, it's not quite hot yet, but if I project out a year, I think this is going to be one of the things that's probably the biggest difference between how clinics operate in a year versus today is you're going to have people just being like, hey, I want to make my own tool. I want to like, I have a particular way that I work. And I want something that's going to do give me exactly this level of information and then do exactly this thing. And now I have a coding agent that can just do it for me. So I'm going to go and do it. And so I think you'll sort of be at the frontier if you're starting to do this today. But I think it's a really exciting, interesting space where you can say, can we make some of our own tools that are very unique to our problems and help us solve our own problems in ways that are um, really compelling for us that maybe no one else will ever build for me? And I think today the answer is yes, and you can sort of uh, get a lot of benefit from that as well.
I love it. We talk a lot about that. We personally do that at Instinct. I know you do. We do at Scribble and Instinct, where teammates build a reporting dashboard that we otherwise can't get out of systems, for example. And we're trying to foster that with Instinct. So if you are an Instinct hospital and you're building some tool that gives you some small add-on feature that you're interested in, we are happy to provide the integration point and support that. It's a pretty exciting time. Okay, well, that kind of leads to my wrap-up question for you. And maybe you answered a little bit here, but looking ahead, what are maybe the top 2 to 3 emerging trends that you personally are most excited for with AI, whether it's veterinary or otherwise?
Um, Yeah, I think one of them is this trend that everyone's going to be a developer. Um, I think today what that's going to look like is you're going to know that you're a developer. You're going to know like I'm going to grab this coding agent, or I'm going to grab Claude Cowork, and I'm going to tell it to write this piece of software for me. Um, and if the system you're using has open enough APIs, which currently is somewhat of a limitation in the veterinary space, Instinct has very open APIs, but that's not necessarily spread throughout. Then there's going to be this pressure on providers to create these open APIs. And so I think that's one change, as a software developer in the veterinary space, we're going to see is a lot more demand for APIs that you can get access to so that you as an individual veterinarian or as an individual clinic can build something for yourself that no one else is going to build for you exactly the way you want it. So that's certainly one. I think if we project out a year or two, my guess is everyone's going to be a developer and a programmer in some way. They're just not going to know it, right? You're going to be sitting there going, I want this tool to actually work differently. And you might prompt your agent that, hey, you would prefer it if it did something else. And then the UI on the site that you're on or the tool that you're using kind of changes to match what you're requesting. And you may not have realized it, but you just became a developer. You actually just caused code to be rewritten on the back end that suits exactly your sort of product sensibilities, and now you have it. So I think things like this are coming. They're probably coming faster than people expect. And yeah, you can sort of be on the frontier today, which is really interesting. Like you can be one of the earliest people to build custom tools for veterinarians for yourself uh, in the world right now by starting to adopt these today. So I think this is one major trend that's coming. I think the other trend that's coming in is the use of really high quality content to help with things like decision support, right? I think we're going to see more and more of that. And this is just again, if you look at what's happening in human med, we're seeing these tools like Open Evidence really take off there. My doctor uses these tools, Open Evidence and Consensus, and all of these tools. And Scribble was the move of human AI scribes to veterinary, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that transfer. Um, so that's definitely coming. And then the third, and this is a really boring one, I don't think AI adoption is anywhere near what it's going to be in a couple years in the veterinary space, right? So, um, yes, everyone will be using some sort of AI tool in 2 years, but my primary bet would be that everyone is going to be having a personal agent as well as a clinical agent, right? That helps them prepare for the day, essentially does a lot of tasks that they were doing before manually, takes a lot of the burden of memory and to-do lists off your plate and kind of does that for you, so that people can really focus on what they're excited about and what they went to veterinary school for, and came into the profession for. And I think that's what that's really going to look like, is a bunch of agents running around doing a bunch of the other stuff, running around digitally in this space. I'm not sure that I'm fully sold on robotics in the next 2 years, but who knows, maybe 5 or 6. But yeah, running around digitally and getting some of this work done.
I love it. Sign me up for all of that. I'm excited. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for joining. This was a little bit of a longer episode, but I think very much worth it, and we hope it helps everybody. I also want to thank you for being at Instinct. It's incredibly exciting to have you here and give the world a window into what you and I's daily discussions look like. We're having fun for sure. But I also think we're really lucky to have you in the vet space as a veterinarian. Seeing entrepreneurs and experts like you helping push us forward is really powerful, and it should be an exciting next few years. So thanks for joining Pick the Brain, and that concludes season 1.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.